I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I need you to understand that everything I believed about my father, about our family, about the sacrifices he made and the pain he carried, all of it shattered in a single afternoon in a small examination room that smelled like antiseptic and decades of buried secrets. My father died 3 weeks ago. But the man I buried wasn't the man I thought I knew. And the doctor who treated him for 47 years. He wasn't just a physician. He was a gatekeeper to a truth so devastating that he chose to carry it to his own grave, except he made one mistake. He wrote it down. I'm telling you this because I need someone to understand. I need someone to hear what happened in that room when I found the file that was never supposed to exist. I need you to know what it feels like to hold your father's entire life in your hands and watch it crumble into something unrecognizable. My name is Daniel Morrison. I'm 44 years old. And 3 weeks ago, I discovered that my father's final checkup wasn't a checkup at all. It was a confession that came 40 years too late. Let me take you back to the beginning. My father, Richard Morrison, was the kind of man who seemed carved from granite. He worked at the same steel mill in Pittsburgh for 38 years. He never missed a day. He never complained. He woke up at 4:30 every morning, drank his coffee black, kissed my mother on the forehead, and walked out the door into the darkness before dawn. I grew up believing he was invincible. He wasn't a man of many words. When I was young, I used to sit on the porch waiting for him to come home, and when he did, covered in grime and sweat, he would ruffle my hair and say the same thing every single day, "Did you take care of your mother?" That was his way of saying he loved me. That was his way of reminding me that family was everything. My mother, Eleanor, was the opposite. She was warmth and laughter and Sunday morning pancakes. She sang while she did the dishes. She cried at commercials. She told me every night before bed that I was her greatest miracle. I never questioned that word. Miracle. I thought she meant it the way all mothers mean it, that children are blessings, that I was wanted and loved. I didn't know she was speaking literally. I didn't know there was a secret buried beneath that word that would one day tear everything apart. Growing up, we weren't wealthy, but we had enough. My father made sure of that. He worked overtime whenever he could. He fixed everything himself, the leaky roof, the broken furnace, the car that should have died 1,000 deaths but somehow kept running because he refused to let it quit. But there was one thing about my father that I never understood. Every year, without fail, he would take a full day off work. Just one. And he would drive 2 hours to a medical clinic in a town I'd never heard of to see a doctor named Harold Jennings. When I was young, I asked him why he drove so far when there were perfectly good doctors in Pittsburgh. He looked at me with something I couldn't identify, something that sat between sadness and fear, and he said, "Because Dr. Jennings knows me. He knows what I need." I accepted that answer. Children accept things because they don't know how to question the gravity in their parents' voices. I didn't know that my father's annual pilgrimage to that small clinic was anything more than loyalty to an old physician. I didn't know that every year, he was walking into that office carrying a weight that would have crushed most men. My mother passed away 7 years ago. Breast cancer. It was brutal and fast, and it broke something in my father that never healed. After she died, he became even quieter. He stopped fixing things around the house. He would sit in his chair by the window for hours, staring at nothing, and when I would visit him, he would look at me like he was trying to memorize my face. "You look so much like her," he would say. "You have her eyes." I thought he meant my mother. I thought he was seeing Eleanor in my features, the way grieving people do. I didn't understand the weight behind those words. I didn't understand that he was speaking about someone else entirely. Last year, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 8, because that's who he was. Richard Morrison didn't quit. He didn't give up. He fought until his body simply couldn't fight anymore. In his final weeks, he asked me to do something strange. He made me promise that after he was gone, I would go to Dr. Jennings' clinic and retrieve his medical file myself. Not have it transferred. Not request it by mail. Go there. In person. There's something in that file, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Something I should have told you years ago. But I was a coward, Daniel. I was too afraid of losing you. I held his hand and told him he could never lose me. I told him whatever was in that file, it wouldn't change anything. I told him he was my father, and that was all that mattered. He looked at me with tears streaming down his hollow cheeks, and he said, "You're a good son. Better than I deserve." He died 3 days later. The funeral was small. My father didn't have many friends left, most of them had passed or moved away over the years. I stood by his grave and watched them lower him into the ground, and I felt something I couldn't name. It wasn't just grief. It was anticipation. Because I knew that whatever was waiting for me in that file was about to change everything. I waited 2 weeks before making the drive. I told myself I was giving myself time to grieve, but the truth is, I was afraid. I was afraid of what my father couldn't tell me. I was afraid of why he had kept this secret for so long. I was afraid of what I might become once I knew the truth. The clinic was exactly what I expected, a small, weathered building in a town called Henderson, about 2 hours outside Pittsburgh. The kind of place that time forgot. The parking lot had 3 cars in it. The sign out front was faded. Dr. Harold Jennings, Family Practice, EST 1962. I walked inside, and the receptionist, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun, looked up at me and smiled. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to pick up my father's medical file," I said. "Richard Morrison." He was a patient of Dr. Jennings. The woman's smile faltered. Something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe, or something closer to fear. "Richard Morrison," she repeated. Oh. Oh, I see. I'm so sorry for your loss. We heard he passed. Dr. Jennings he was very affected by the news. Is Dr. Jennings available? I'd like to speak with him. The woman hesitated. Dr. Jennings retired 3 years ago. His health isn't what it used to be. But. She paused, studying my face. Wait here. Let me make a call. She disappeared into the back, and I stood in that empty waiting room, surrounded by outdated magazines and the faint smell of disinfectant, feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. 10 minutes later, she returned. Dr. Jennings would like to see you. He lives about 15 minutes from here. I'll write down the address. I don't remember the drive to his house. I don't remember the neighborhoods I passed or the turns I made. I only remember pulling into the driveway of a small, well-kept home with a garden out front and thinking, this is where the truth lives. Dr. Harold Jennings answered the door himself. He was 89 years old, frail and bent, with wispy white hair and hands that trembled slightly as he reached out to shake mine. But his eyes were sharp and alive and filled with something that looked almost like relief. Daniel, he said, as if he had been waiting for me his entire life. You look just like her. My God, you look just like her. There it was again. Those words. You look just like her. Like who? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Who do I look like? Dr. Jennings stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. Please. Sit down. There's something I've been waiting to tell you for 44 years. And I think it's time you finally knew the truth. The inside of his home was modest but comfortable. Medical books lined the shelves. Photographs covered every surface, decades of patients, families, children who had grown into adults. He led me to a small sitting room and lowered himself into a chair with the careful movements of a man whose body had become his enemy. I have your father's file, he said. But before I give it to you, I need to tell you a story. A story your father made me promise never to tell. But he's gone now. And you deserve to know. I sat across from him, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. Tell me. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. 44 years ago, a young woman came to my clinic. She was 19 years old, unmarried, and 8 months pregnant. She was terrified. She had been abandoned by the baby's father, disowned by her family, and she had nowhere to go. Her name was Catherine. He paused, watching me, gauging my reaction. Catherine was beautiful. Dark hair, green eyes, a smile that could light up a room even when her heart was breaking. But she was dying, Daniel. She had a heart condition, a defect she'd been born with. She knew she wouldn't survive the birth. She knew she had weeks, maybe days, left to live. And all she cared about, all she wanted, was for her baby to have a chance. My hands were shaking. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. Richard Morrison was working construction in Henderson that summer. He used to come into the diner where Catherine worked. He fell in love with her, anyone could see it. He didn't care that she was pregnant with another man's child. He didn't care about her past. He loved her purely and completely, in that rare way that most people never experience. Dr. Jennings' voice cracked. When Catherine went into labor, Richard was by her side. He held her hand through the entire delivery. He was there when the baby was born, a healthy boy with his mother's eyes. And he was there when Catherine looked at that baby, looked at Richard, and said, "Take care of him. Promise me you'll take care of him." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. Catherine died 40 minutes after you were born, Daniel. She died holding your hand, telling you she loved you, begging Richard to give you the life she couldn't. Tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't even try. Richard Morrison wasn't your biological father, Dr. Jennings said softly. But he became your father that day. He married Eleanor 6 months later, a woman who couldn't have children, who knew the whole story, who loved you like you were her own because to her, you were. They built a life together. They raised you together. And they never told you the truth because they were terrified of losing you. I stood up. I had to move, had to pace, had to do something with the energy that was tearing through my body. Why? Why keep this from me? Why lie to me my entire life? Dr. Jennings reached for a folder on the table beside him, worn, yellowed, held together with a rubber band that looked like it might disintegrate at any moment. Because of this, he said, handing it to me. Because of what's in this file. I took it with trembling hands and opened it. The first page was Catherine's medical record. Her diagnosis. Her prognosis. The notes from her final days. But it was the second page that stopped my heart. It was a letter. Handwritten. Dated the day before I was born. To my son. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. It means Richard kept his promise and raised you as his own. It means you grew up loved, even if I couldn't be there to love you myself. I want you to know that you were never a mistake. You were never unwanted. You were the greatest thing that ever happened to me, even if I only got to hold you for a few minutes. Your father, your biological father, was a man named Thomas Whitfield. He was charming and handsome and he told me he loved me. But when I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. I heard later that he went on to become something important, a politician, maybe, or a businessman. I don't know. I stopped caring. What I do know is this: Richard Morrison is more of a father than Thomas Whitfield ever could have been. Richard chose you. He didn't have to. He could have walked away. But he stayed. He loved me even though I was dying. He promised to love you for the rest of his life. I need you to understand something, my sweet boy. Family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up, every single day, even when it's hard. Richard Morrison is your real father. He's the one who will be there for your first steps, your first words, your first heartbreak. He's the one who will teach you how to be a man. Don't be angry with him for keeping this secret. He did it to protect you. He did it because he loved you more than his own life. And if you ever doubt that you were wanted, if you ever wonder whether you mattered, remember this: I gave up everything so that you could have a chance. I would do it again 1,000 times over. You are my miracle, Daniel. My beautiful, perfect miracle. I love you forever. Mom. I don't know how long I sat there, holding that letter, reading it over and over until the words blurred together through my tears. Dr. Jennings sat in silence, giving me the space to fall apart. He came every year, the doctor finally said. Richard. Every year on your birthday, he would drive here. He would sit in my office and read that letter. He would cry. And then he would pull himself together and go home and be your father for another year. Why didn't he ever give this to me? Because he was afraid, Dr. Jennings said simply. He was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would love him less. He was afraid you would go looking for Thomas Whitfield and find a father who never wanted you. He was afraid that all those years of sacrifice and love wouldn't be enough. I thought about my father, the man who worked overtime so I could play baseball, who drove me to college and cried when he dropped me off, who walked my wife down the aisle at our wedding because her own father had passed away. I thought about every "did you take care of your mother," and every silent moment of sitting beside him, feeling loved even when no words were spoken. He was wrong, I whispered. It was always enough. He was always enough. Dr. Jennings nodded slowly. I told him that. Every year, I told him that. But Richard Morrison was a proud man and a humble man all at once. He never believed he deserved you. I looked down at the file in my hands, at the decades of medical records and handwritten notes and the letter from a mother I never knew. There's one more thing, Dr. Jennings said. Something your father asked me to tell you, if you ever came here. He said he hoped you could forgive him. Not for keeping the secret, but for not being brave enough to tell you himself. I closed my eyes and saw my father's face on that last day in the hospital. The tears on his cheeks. The fear in his eyes. I was a coward, Daniel. He wasn't a coward. He was a man who loved so deeply that he was terrified of losing it. He was a man who gave his entire life to a child who wasn't his by blood but was his in every way that mattered. There's nothing to forgive, I said, my voice breaking. There was never anything to forgive. I stayed with Dr. Jennings for 3 more hours. He told me stories about Catherine, how she laughed, how she sang, how she talked about the future she knew she would never see. He told me about Richard, young and strong and desperately in love, promising a dying woman that her son would never want for anything. Before I left, Dr. Jennings handed me something else, a photograph, faded and worn, of a young woman with dark hair and green eyes. She was standing in front of a diner, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, smiling at the camera like she had all the time in the world. That's your mother, he said. Catherine. Richard gave that to me for safekeeping. He wanted you to have it when the time was right. I looked at the photograph, at the woman who gave her life so I could have mine, and I finally understood. I understood why my father carried that weight for so many years. I understood why my mother, Eleanor, called me her miracle. I understood why family isn't about blood or biology or DNA. It's about love. It's about sacrifice. It's about choosing someone, every single day, even when it costs you everything. My father chose me. He chose me before I was born. He chose me every morning when he went to work and every night when he came home. He chose me when he kept that secret and when he finally asked me to discover the truth. I drove home that night with the file on the passenger seat, the photograph tucked carefully in my wallet, and the letter from my birth mother pressed against my heart. I thought about the 2 women who loved me, Catherine, who gave me life, and Eleanor, who taught me how to live it. I thought about the man who became my father not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And I realized something that changed everything. We spend so much time looking for where we came from that we forget to appreciate where we are. We dig through the past, searching for answers, when the people who loved us were standing right in front of us the whole time. Richard Morrison wasn't my biological father. But he was my dad. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike and throw a baseball and stand up for what was right. He was the one who worked himself to the bone so I could have opportunities he never had. He was the one who loved me silently, fiercely, unconditionally. And that's the truth that Dr. Jennings kept for decades. Not a lie, a love story. A story about a man who walked into a clinic 44 years ago and walked out with a son. A story about sacrifice and devotion and the kind of love that doesn't need blood to be real. I went to my father's grave the next morning. I sat in the wet grass and told him everything, that I found the file, that I read the letter, that I finally understood. I told him I wasn't angry. I told him I was grateful. I told him he was the best father anyone could have asked for. And then I said the words I should have said 1,000 times while he was alive: thank you. Thank you for choosing me. I don't know if he heard me. I don't know if the dead can hear the words we say to them. But I choose to believe he did. I choose to believe that somewhere, somehow, he knows. I still have that photograph of Catherine. I look at it sometimes and wonder what my life would have been like if she had lived. But then I remember, if she had lived, I might never have known Richard Morrison. I might never have been his son. And that's not a life I would trade for anything. If you're watching this, if you've made it this far, I want you to think about the people who chose you. Not the ones who had to love you, the ones who wanted to. The ones who showed up when it was hard. The ones who sacrificed so you could become who you are. Tell them thank you. Tell them you love them. Don't wait until it's too late, like I did. And if you have a story like mine, a story about family, about love, about the secrets that bind us together, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments. Share it with the people who need to hear it. Because these stories matter. They remind us that we're not alone. My father's last checkup revealed a lie that the doctor kept for decades. But it also revealed a truth that was more powerful than any secret, that love, real love, is a choice we make every single day. And Richard Morrison chose me. Every day, for 44 years. That's not a lie. That's a legacy.